Hi everybody, this is TJR. It is Beatles Month here on the channel, this month here in June. And I thought it might be fun to rebroadcast a video that I originally did with music writer Robert Kinsler, music writer for the Orange County Register, where we reviewed and discussed the Beatles in Mono box set that was released back in 2009. Now, in case you weren't familiar with this already, this was simultaneously released alongside the stereo box set, which was the 2009 remasters. And this particular box featured the first 10 Beatle albums with their original UK mono mixes. These had never been released on CD before, and unless you bought imports, back in the day when they were first released, you just couldn't really get these in the US unless maybe you found some very expensive, copies that you could buy on eBay or something like that. But this features every single album from their first album, Please Please Me, all the way up to the White Album. It features the first 10 albums, the original mono mixes. After that, the Beatles did switch over to stereo for the UK. And it also features the Beatles Past Masters in mono, Volumes 1 and Volume 2 as well. And at any rate, though, back then, Robert and I had a channel where we were reviewing albums. We had to lose that channel, unfortunately. We had to get rid of it due to some issues with Google, and we had to start over again. So this video that I'm about to rebroadcast here has been gone for some time now. But since it is Beatles Month, I thought it would be fun to just rebroadcast it. Originally, we had to cut the video up into two parts because back then YouTube wouldn't allow videos that were longer than 15 minutes. We had to put it together in two parts. But here I've put them all together here for you. Now, before I present this rebroadcast, I do want to stress something here. This was made back in 2009, and I did as much research as I could at the time, in preparation for the video. There are certain facts that have since come to light that we didn't know about then. And so there might be a few things that I say when I'm explaining some of the history that I got maybe not 100% accurate. But I went with the best information I had at the time. Since then, a lot more information has been made available, and I'll admit there are a few things I said that were a bit incorrect and might have just remembered incorrectly. At any rate, though, I just wanted to put that out there for all the more anally retentive internet trolls out there watching, and you know who you are. Here's a little trip back to 2009, and here's myself and Robert Kinsler reviewing the Beatles in Mono box set.
Hello, and welcome to Music Worth Buying. My name is Robert Kinsler. I'm a music writer and a musician.
My name is TJR. I'm a musician and a music writer.
I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's a very special show. We're going to delve into the Beatles here, a band I think everybody on the planet knows about.
You should.
And we're actually going to be featuring, you've all heard about the new remasters of the Beatles.
The stereo box set.
The stereo box set, their classic catalog. We're actually going to be focusing on the Beatles in mono. And I think many people out here might be wondering why we'd be talking about the mono box set specifically. And I think you have some really good thoughts on why we're doing that today.
Thanks.
Too.
Like a lot of people, when I first saw the Beatles in Mono box set being advertised, I thought, why? And you have to kind of understand the history. The Beatles recorded and mixed, along with their producer George Martin, and put all their effort on their first 10 albums. They put all their effort into mono mixes. Now the reason is because mono was the standard in the UK and remained so for their first 10 albums. The stereo mixes that we're all used to hearing here were considered an afterthought for the US market. In many cases, a second generation master tape would be sent to the US, and engineers would then pan hard right and hard left the mixes that they worked on in for mono. And in some cases, George Martin's involvement was maybe minimal. The Beatles had no involvement in the stereo mixes. They spent 4 months mixing Sgt. Pepper for mono. And then when George Martin said to him, "Hey guys, we got to do the stereo mix now," they said, "Oh, you can do that, George." And George Martin said 2 weeks was spent mixing it for stereo.
Wow.
And some things that occurred between the stereo and mono mixes, in some cases, certain parts of the songs got washed out in the stereo mixes. In some cases, certain effects got washed out. Vocal effects, guitar effects got washed out when converted to stereo. So I think to give people an example of what this is like, I want to play a brief portion of the Sgt. Pepper album. This is the Sgt. Pepper reprise, and this is the ending. And you'll hear Paul McCartney shouting out to the audience. You don't hear this in the stereo mix. So let's give them a little listen of that right now.
Fantastic.
Now that was a good example of a part that was recorded for the album that got completely washed out when it was remixed for stereo. And also another thing that happened is in some cases the engineers would mistakenly use a different vocal take for the stereo mix versus a vocal take for the mono mix. And this has happened in like the song Help. John Lennon's vocal take is different from the one that was on the stereo mix that we're all used to hearing. So let's talk about the packaging.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the packaging. Now, again, we have all the albums faithfully reproduced as far as the mono sound goes. We've been talking about that. But actually, the CDs themselves and the jackets and the artwork, they actually replicate the original album releases,
in precise detail.
In precise detail. I mean, we're just going to look at Sgt. Pepper's right now, but everybody knows the famous, probably the world's most famous album cover, I would venture to say here. But that, and then obviously the picture of the Fab Four there in their great suits there.
But what people probably aren't familiar with is these are replications of the UK releases. Show them the sleeve.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
If you bought this album in the UK, you had this very different psychedelic album sleeve. And so even this is faithfully reproduced. And
all the other inserts as well.
Yeah, which of course many people are familiar with from the American versions too.
Right,
the little inserts that came with it.
Yeah, and it's just fantastic to see these again, and they've just done, just a wonderful job in really delivering the music the way Beatles fans have been clamoring for it since, I think the original CDs came out about 22 years ago.
Yeah.
And pretty much for the last 20 years, fans have been complaining about the quality of just the original issues, and here now finally we have this great package with the great sounding mono recordings.
And also the CDs themselves come in these little protective plastic sleeves too, nice little added touch. But also we should talk about the great booklet that comes with this.
Yeah, let's talk about that as well. There's a great informational booklet here. I don't know how many pages it is, but it's quite a few. Fantastic photographs, many of them never before seen, of the Fab Four, and really a lot of details about these recordings. And and one thing that really stood out for me that I have to mention is when I was thinking about two of my favorite Beatles albums were Rubber Soul and Revolver. You think about Rubber Soul came out in December of '65. Revolver was released a mere 8 months later in early August of '66. And I think about some of the bands today, they spend 2-3 years to come out with albums that are pretty much going to be forgotten within a few months. These are just, you think about how brilliant the Beatles were, how brilliant George Martin was with the recording of these. It's just really a great chance to rediscover the power of these, of their musical genius, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. And they did this with very primitive 4-track reel-to-reel machines. Also, one quick note, also each album comes with its own little individual protective little mylar sleeve, which is self-sealing to protect these CDs. Another great aspect of the packaging of this. Getting back to the whole idea of the difference between the mono and the stereo mixes, we're going to listen to, and we're going to do a back-to-back comparison here. We're going to listen to George Harrison's guitar solo from the song Tomorrow Never Knows, which is off the Revolver album. We're going to hear it, the stereo version, and then we're going to hear the mono version of it back-to-back. And notice the difference in the sound of the guitar. There's in the mono version, there's a bizarre phasing effect to the guitar, which once again got washed out in the stereo mixes, and it really adds a unique and darker element to the song when you hear this. So let's check this out right now. So there we hear a big difference in what can happen, what happened sometimes when certain sound effects got washed out when they were mixed for stereo. And part of this is due to the technology for stereo that was available back then. To understand this, nowadays when we listen to stereo, we have the vocals in the center, and we have the rest of the band panned right and left to varying degrees, so that when we hear it coming at us like this, in more of a surround stereo sound. Now back in the 60s, the technology they had available to them was more primitive. They could only pan things hard right and hard left. So you would only hear, as an example, guitar and vocals on one side, bass and drums on the other side. So you heard it like this. Even though you had two speakers, you were hearing it with this kind of ping-pong stereo. And that's what's on these, that's what was on the 87 remasters, that's what's on the new remasters. And is this very hard right and left separation. Now, oddly enough, and opinions on this vary, but my opinion, and your opinion too, is that with the mono mixes, we don't hear it like this, we hear it like this.
Exactly.
And so, in my opinion, this sounds a lot fuller than hearing it in the ping pong stereo, as we are referring to it.
And that's a long way, but an accurate way to really get at that. Although mono may sound like it's a more primitive technology, actually when it comes to these presentations of the Beatles albums, it is the way to go. I mean, these songs just are fantastic the way they wash over you. It's in many cases it's like hearing them for the first time. It's just terrific.
They sound fuller, they sound richer in these mono mixes, in my opinion. And opinions do vary, of course. Some people prefer the stereo, regardless. But I would say, if you have grown up with these stereo versions, as we have here in the U.S., this mono set is going to give you something really new to listen to on a number of levels. I would say if you want to get a complete catalog, of course, this is only the first 10 albums. After that, the Beatles and George Martin began to mix their last 3 albums in stereo for both the US and the UK. So those US stereo mixes are, I would call, the definitive mixes of those 3 albums. Just as I would call these mono mixes the definitive mixes. This is how the Beatles wanted their music to be heard for these first 10 albums. The stereo mixes, we don't want to diss them, they sound great, we've enjoyed them for decades, but I would say this is the definitive mix. So I would say if you buy the mono set and you want to have a completely updated, complete catalog, then go out and get Yellow Submarine, Abbey Road, and Let It Be, the new 2009 stereo remasters.
Right.
And of course, nothing's stopping you from getting the new stereo remasters of the other albums. Both the first 3 albums by the Beatles were released in mono in the US and the UK because stereo didn't exist at that point. The US switched over to stereo, the UK stayed with mono for a while longer. So the first 3 albums are being released on CD in stereo for the first time with the new 2009 stereo remixes, and that might be something to consider too. We've been talking about the first 10 albums, but we should also add that it does also come with the Mono Masters CD. This is actually a 2-disc set, and it contains all of the songs that weren't released on albums. Songs like Paperback Writer, Hey Jude, Revolution.
And it has Rain on it too, doesn't
Rain,
it? I love that song.
All the songs that weren't released on albums are here. In fact, you even get the 4 original songs that were off the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. Also, as an additional bonus, Help and Rubber Soul both come with what's been dubbed on this set as the 67 stereo mixes. Now what this means is George Martin experimented in the UK creating a stereo mix for these 2 albums that would hopefully sound good on mono players. So you get those 2 mixes, along with the mono mixes, you get the 67 stereo mixes in the UK that were created for these albums. These mixes have never been available in the United States, and probably only available in the UK as very rare vinyl pressings. So that's a great additional feature that you get with that.
Just a great set.
Yeah.
Really with these you can't go wrong. The Beatles, basically, I think we both are speaking for each other here. They are the most influential and the greatest band of all time, and I think that these releases, they just are just another great excuse to remind us about how brilliant not only George Martin was in the studio, but just the Beatles themselves and what they did, how they pushed the envelope and also just took songwriting and everything to such a higher level than everybody else. Yeah.
And they did it with very primitive 4-track technology. They didn't get to use 8 tracks until Abbey Road, the last album they ever recorded. They finally had 8 tracks. Wow. You know, amazing what they accomplished.
Well, this has been a great great trip down memory lane,
Yeah.
huh? I mean, it's been fantastic, and I want to thank everybody out there for watching Music Worth Buying. My name's Robert Kinsler. You can read more of my work at ocregister.com and musicworthbuying.com.
My name's TJR, and you can read my writings at musicworthbuying.com, and you can listen to my music at tjrmusic.com.
And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thanks for joining us.
Take care. Hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that rebroadcast. One thing that I wanted to say that I didn't say back then, and wished I had brought it up, is that at the time this came out, this was actually a more expensive set than the Beatles in Stereo box set. The Beatles in Stereo box set gave you the entire catalog. This did not, yet they charged more for it. I think originally it was because it was supposed to be a limited edition release, and initially that was true, and I don't think they were expecting such a demand for it. It sold out immediately and then began to have extremely inflated prices on eBay, people trying to resell it. It was really insane what they were charging. So to meet the demand, they started making more of them, and now you can still even order it now on Amazon. But someone had commented back then that for the price you were paying for this, they should have also just given you mini vinyl replica CD versions of both Yellow Submarine and Abbey Road and Let It Be, which were the 3 albums that were not included on this set. And I have to say I agree. For what they were charging, they should have included those 2, even though they weren't mono, they were in stereo. Instead of calling this the mono box set, this should have been called the UK mixes, or the UK box set. But at any rate, though, never regretted buying this. Loved hearing this set. It let me hear the Beatles in a whole new light back then in 2009. Hope you enjoyed that rebroadcast, and looking forward to your comments. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot.